Imagine yourself in the crossfire. You're standing in the heart of a heated argument, and the air itself feels charged, electric with hostility. Your heart is a drum beating against your ribs. Your breath is shallow. Every word hurled at you feels like a physical blow, every pause in their speech a critical opening for your own counterattack. Your mind is a whirlwind, frantically forging your next response, a perfectly crafted sentence, a sharp piece of logic, a cutting remark, a weapon you believe will win this battle, prove you are right, and force them into submission. You are a warrior defending a fortress. The fortress of your ego. But here's the unsettling truth. The person standing opposite you is doing the exact same thing. They aren't listening to your carefully crafted points. They aren't considering your logic. They are simply reloading, waiting for you to stop speaking so they can fire their next volley. It is a duel where both participants have already plugged their ears, a war of attrition where the only prize is exhaustion, and then a figure steps out of the shadows of your mind. It's not a friend to take your side, or a judge to declare a winner. It is a philosopher, a strategist, a physician of the soul. It is Friedrich Nietzsche, and he doesn't look at your opponent. He looks directly at you. He leans in, and with a voice that cuts through the noise of your own anger, he whispers a devastating truth. You have already lost. What could he possibly mean? You are fighting. You are holding your ground. You haven't surrendered. How can this be defeat? Because, according to Nietzsche, the moment you allow another person to dictate your emotional state, the moment you are drawn into their frame, you have surrendered the one thing that truly matters, your own power. True strength, he argues, is not found in the clangor of battle, but in the profound, unnerving, and absolute control of the self. It isn't about winning the argument, it's about mastering the battlefield so thoroughly that the argument itself becomes irrelevant. So, what is this hidden power? How can silence be more potent than 1,000 perfect arguments? And how can you learn the silent art of winning a war before it even begins? To answer that, we must descend into the labyrinth of human psychology and uncover the revolutionary strategies of one of history's most dangerous minds. Most of us are taught from a young age that power is assertive. It's about speaking up, making your case, and proving others wrong. Our stories are filled with heroic debaters and triumphant orators. But Nietzsche saw this as a profound misunderstanding, a trap set for the weak. He believed that the power celebrated by the masses was merely the noise of the herd. True power, the power of the sovereign individual, was found in a place most people are too afraid to look: strategic, deliberate, and weaponized restraint. To understand why, we must first perform an autopsy on the common argument. Have you ever truly stopped to ask why people argue? Not just what they argue about, but what deep psychological hunger they are trying to feed. Nietzsche would say that less than 1% of arguments are a genuine search for truth. The rest are symptoms of a deeper sickness. They are, first and foremost, a desperate protection of the ego. For most people, their beliefs are not tools they use. They are bricks in the house of their identity. When you challenge one of those beliefs, they don't feel like you are offering a new perspective. They feel like you are taking a sledgehammer to their living room wall. And to admit they are wrong is not just an intellectual concession. It feels like a form of psychic death, a dissolution of a part of themselves. Their mind, in a panic of self-preservation, will resist this at all costs. It will ignore logic, twist facts, and lash out emotionally, all to protect the fragile structure of who they think they are. The argument is no longer about the topic. It's a frantic, primal defense of the self. Secondly, Most arguments are nothing more than primitive power struggles. Forget facts and logic. Watch the dynamics. Who speaks louder? Who interrupts more? Who controls the emotional tone? Who controls the emotional tone of the room? Who forces the other to become defensive? These are not the hallmarks of a search for truth. These are the ritualistic displays of pack animals vying for dominance. The person who needs to be the last one to speak, who needs to deliver the final cutting remark, is not seeking enlightenment. Not seeking enlightenment. They are seeking to establish their position in a social hierarchy. They are trying to prove to themselves and to others that they are on top. And finally, arguments are often a pathetic plea for social validation. Many people argue not because they hold a deep conviction, but because they want to be seen as intelligent, confident, or aligned with the values of their chosen group. Their position is a performance, a costume they wear to gain approval from the herd. They are not independent thinkers. They are parrots, reciting the opinions that they believe will grant them safety and status within their tribe. They are terrified of being cast out, and so they will defend the tribe's ideas with a ferocity that has nothing to do with personal belief and everything to do with a fear of isolation. Nietzsche looked upon these behaviors, the frantic ego defense, the crude power struggles, the desperate need for validation, and saw them not as signs of strength, but as the clanking chains of slaves. A person who is easily provoked, who can be dragged into an emotional battle by a few choice words, is not a master of their own domain. They are a puppet, and their opponent is pulling the strings. The moment you let someone else's words ignite anger or defensiveness in you, you have ceded control. You are no longer acting, you are reacting. And in that reaction, Nietzsche would say, you have already been conquered. This is the foundation of his revolutionary idea, the will to power. This concept is one of the most misunderstood in all of philosophy. It is not about brute force, tyranny, or the crude domination we just described. The will to power, in its most refined form, is the fundamental drive of all things to expand, to grow, to overcome resistance, and to impose their own unique form upon reality. And for a human being, this power begins with the absolute mastery of the self. It is the ability to command your own emotions, to direct your own focus, and to act from a place of conscious, deliberate choice, rather than from blind, instinctual reaction. And this is where Nietzsche introduces his ideal, the Übermensch, the overman, or superior individual. The Übermensch is not some blonde-haired, blue-eyed tyrant. That was a grotesque caricature, created by his Nazi sister after his death. The true Übermensch is a master of self-discipline. He is not emotionally reactive like the average person. He does not feel the desperate, itching need to correct every wrong opinion he hears. He does not argue just to win or to satisfy his ego. Instead, he views the entire social world as a grand chessboard. He observes the moves, understands the motivations of the other players, and then, from a place of calm, psychological distance, he chooses whether to engage at all. His power is not in talking, it is in his complete control over the entire interaction. Imagine a high-stakes business meeting. A junior executive, insecure and eager to impress, is loudly and aggressively challenging a proposal. He's talking fast, using jargon, interrupting others. He's trying with every fiber of his being to project strength and intelligence. Across the table sits a senior director. She is silent. She doesn't interrupt. She doesn't get defensive. She simply listens, her gaze steady, her posture relaxed. The junior executive, fueled by her silence, talks even more, becoming more and more agitated. He starts to fill the void she leaves, revealing his anxieties, his assumptions, his lack of preparation. He is unraveling, live for everyone to see. When he finally sputters to a halt, exhausted, the director pauses for a long, deliberate moment. The entire room leans in. Then she speaks. Her voice is calm, her words are few, but they are precise. She doesn't attack him. She simply asks one or two quiet, incisive questions that expose the fundamental flaw in his entire argument. The conversation is over. He has been dismantled, not with a barrage of words, but with a scalpel of silence. Who held the real power in that room? Nietzsche would argue that the person who remains in control of their own emotional state, who refuses to be dragged into the mud of reactivity, always wins in the long run. Strategic silence, when used correctly, is not weakness. It is a psychological superweapon. When you remain silent while another person is ranting, you force them to confront the sound of their own voice, their own escalating emotion. With nothing to push against, they often push themselves off balance. Your silence creates a vacuum, and they, in their discomfort, will rush to fill it with more words, often revealing more than they intended. Their motivations, their insecurities, their hidden agenda. Silence creates tension. It's a social void, and humans are deeply uncomfortable with voids. They become uncertain. They begin to second-guess themselves. Why aren't they responding? Do they know something I don't? Did I say something stupid? Your composure becomes a mirror, reflecting their lack of it. This gives you absolute control. The Übermensch doesn't just stumble into silence, he wields it. A deliberate pause before answering a question can make the subsequent answer seem infinitely more profound. A moment of quiet restraint in the face of an insult communicates that the insult was so far beneath you. It didn't even register as an attack. A well-timed, thoughtful response that waits until the emotional storm has passed will land with the force of a thunderclap in the ensuing quiet. This is why Nietzsche's vision of power is so radically different from our own. It's not about fighting, it's about mastering the internal and external battlefield so completely that the fight itself becomes a crude and unnecessary tool. It's about understanding the psychology of your opponent better than they understand it themselves. To see this power in action, we need only look to history, not at the loud kings and conquering generals, but at the silent masters of influence. Consider Miyamoto Musashi, the undefeated 17th century samurai who won over 60 duels. His legend is built not just on his peerless skill with a sword, but on his mastery of psychological warfare. Musashi understood that a duel is won or lost in the mind before the first blade is ever drawn. His most famous duel was against Sasaki Kojiro, a brilliant and celebrated swordsman famous for his speed and his signature move, the swallow cut. Kojiro was a proud warrior, a master of technique and form. Musashi, on the other hand, was a master of chaos and control. For their duel set on a remote island, Musashi did something outrageous. He arrived 3 hours late. Imagine Kojiro, the celebrated master, waiting on that beach. With every passing minute, his focus dissipates, replaced by frustration, then anger, then pure, seething rage. He feels disrespected, humiliated in front of the officials. By the time Musashi's small boat finally drifts to shore, Kojiro is a wreck. He is no longer a calm, focused warrior. He is a bundle of raw, furious emotion. As Musashi casually steps onto the beach, having carved a makeshift wooden sword from an oar during his journey, Kojiro, blinded by fury, screams an insult and hastily draws his fine steel katana, casting the scabbard into the sea. Musashi looks at him calmly and says, "If you have no more use for your scabbard, you are already dead." This final psychological blow shatters what little composure Kojiro has left. The fight is brief. Kojiro's anger makes him predictable. Musashi, in a state of calm readiness, easily defeats him. Musashi knew that if your enemy is emotional, they are already weak. He did not need to be faster than Kojiro. He only needed to dismantle his enemy's mind. His lateness, his rustic appearance, his calm demeanor. It was all a deliberate strategy to provoke a reaction. While Kojiro was losing control, Musashi was tightening his. This is the will to power on the battlefield. The superior individual does not simply react to the world. He forces the world to react to him. Or consider the father of Western philosophy, Socrates. He lived in Athens, a city that prized fiery rhetoric and dramatic public debate. Yet Socrates never engaged in this way. He never gave grand speeches or attacked his opponents with loud declarations. His method was far more subtle and far more devastating. He simply asked questions. Imagine a powerful politician, confident and adored by the masses, who claims to know the true meaning of justice. Socrates approaches him not as an adversary, but as a humble, ignorant student. "You are wise, and I am not," Socrates would say. "Please, teach me, what is justice?" The politician, eager to display his wisdom, offers a confident textbook definition. Socrates nods and then asks a simple, clarifying question. And another, and another, and another, and another. Each question seems innocent, but each one is a carefully placed probe designed to test the foundations of the politician's belief. Slowly, methodically, the definition begins to crumble. The politician, once so certain, starts to contradict himself. He becomes flustered, defensive. The crowd watching begins to see the cracks in his intellectual armor. In the end, the man is left speechless, his celebrated wisdom exposed as hollow rhetoric. Socrates did not need to tell people they were wrong. He engineered a situation where they were forced to discover it for themselves. He understood a fundamental law of human psychology. People will fight tooth and nail against a truth that is forced upon them, but they will readily accept a truth they believe they have discovered on their own. His quiet, relentless questioning was a form of silent intellectual combat, and it was so powerful, so threatening to the established order, that the Athenian state ultimately sentenced him to death for it. They couldn't win the argument, so they decided to eliminate the argar. What do a samurai swordsman and an ancient Greek philosopher have in common? They both understood that direct, reactive conflict is the tool of the amateur. The master never wastes energy on a useless argument. They don't react. They dictate the terms of engagement. They understand that true power is not found in the volume of your words, but in the depth of your influence, an influence often best cultivated through strategic silence and unnerving calm. The next time you feel that familiar, hot rush of blood, that desperate urge to argue, to defend, to prove yourself right, I want you to pause. And in that pause, I want you to ask yourself a simple question derived from Nietzsche's philosophy. Am I acting, or am I acting, or am I being acted upon? Am I the master of this situation, or am I a puppet reacting to a provocation? Because true power is silent. It is the wisdom to observe when others are desperate to be seen. It is the discipline to stay calm when others are consumed by emotion. And it is the strength to hold your words until they have the weight of an avalanche. This is the first half of the lesson. It is the art of the unfought war, the power of mastering yourself so that others lose control. But this is not the whole story. For Nietzsche, a life lived in pure, passive silence is also a life of weakness. He was not a philosopher of withdrawal. He was a philosopher of struggle, of growth, of glorious, life-affirming conflict. Power, he knew, is not just found in the wars we avoid. It is forged in the fires of the battles we deliberately choose to fight. To only know silence is to be a shield without a sword, and a shield alone can never shape the world. So, how do we know when to stay silent and when to unleash the full force of our voice? How do we turn from the master of restraint into the architect of reality? That is the crucible we must enter next. We learn the profound power of restraint. We stood with Musashi on the quiet beach, letting our opponent's rage defeat him. We walked with Socrates through the Athenian marketplace, dismantling egos with quiet, devastating questions. We learn that in the chaos of human interaction, the one who controls their own reaction often controls the entire game. Silence, we discovered, is not emptiness. It is a weapon, a shield, and a sign of immense self-mastery. But is that the final word on power? A life of perpetual silence, of constant withdrawal, of always choosing the unfought war. Nietzsche would laugh at such a timid conclusion. A life lived only in defense is a life half-lived. The philosopher who taught us the strength of silence was the same man who wrote, "That which does not kill me makes me stronger." He was not an advocate for the safety of the harbor. He was a champion of the open, stormy sea. Fee. Avoiding conflict completely is not wisdom. It is often fear disguised as prudence. The true path to power, the path of the Übermensch, is not about choosing silence or conflict. It is about mastering both. It is knowing when to be the immovable mountain and when to be the earthquake that shakes its foundations. Welcome to the other side of the equation. Welcome to the alchemist's forge, where we don't avoid the fire of conflict. We use it to shape reality itself. To do this, we must revisit the will to power, but this time look at its active, creative impulse. For Nietzsche, everything in the universe is striving to express its power, to grow, to overcome. A tree pushes through concrete, a river carves a canyon, an artist imposes their vision onto a canvas. This is the will to power in action. For a human being, this means not just mastering the self, but using that mastered self to make an impact, to create, to build, and sometimes to destroy what is old and stagnant to make way for the new. The great error of the weak, Nietzsche believed, is that they see all conflict as dangerous and painful. They seek comfort, security, and the absence of struggle. But the strong thinker, the Übermensch, understands that struggle is the necessary ingredient for all growth. No. Discomfort is the signpost of progress. Challenge is the whetstone that sharpens the blade of the mind. Think of it this way. A muscle that is never strained against resistance will atrophy and weaken. A warrior who only ever trains against passive dummies will be shattered in a real fight. A scientific theory that is never challenged by rigorous attempts to disprove it is not a robust theory. It is a fragile dogma. In the exact same way, a mind that is never forced to defend its ideas, a character that is never tested by adversity, a conviction that is never thrown into the crucible of debate, remains dull, weak, and hollow. The person who avoids all arguments isn't wise. They are brittle. The boldest thinkers in history understood this instinctively. They did not achieve greatness by staying silent. Galileo was condemned for challenging the heavens. Martin Luther was excommunicated for challenging the church. Mary Wollstonecraft was ridiculed for challenging the patriarchal subjugation of women. Their power did not come from their silence. It came from their courageous decision to engage in necessary, world-changing conflict. They looked at a flawed reality and, instead of quietly accepting it, they chose to argue with it. This reveals the critical distinction we must all learn to make. The difference between arguing to prove you are right and arguing to shape reality. The first is an act of ego. The second is an act of creation. The weak argue for validation. The powerful argue for transformation. And there is no greater modern example of a master of constructive conflict than Steve Jobs. If Socrates and Musashi represent the power of restraint, Jobs represents the power of strategic, purposeful engagement. He did not avoid arguments. He orchestrated them. He did not fear conflict. He used it as a tool to push people beyond what they thought was possible. His leadership at Apple was legendary for its intensity. He was known for his reality distortion field, a term for his ability to convince anyone of almost anything through a mixture of charisma, unwavering conviction, and sheer force of will. But it wasn't magic. It was a deliberate strategy. Consider the creation of the very first iPhone. His engineering team, brilliant in their own right, was convinced that a smartphone needed a physical keyboard. It was practical. It was what consumers were used to. It was the safe bet. Jobs had a different, seemingly insane vision. A single, perfect slab of glass. A full touch screen. He didn't just overrule his team. That would have bred resentment and killed creativity. Instead, he initiated a war. He challenged them, pushed them, argued with them relentlessly. He forced them to defend their position, to test their assumptions, to confront the limitations of their own thinking. It was a brutal, exhausting process. But through this managed conflict, he wasn't just trying to win a debate. He was guiding them, forcing them to solve a problem they didn't even think was solvable. He was using the pressure of the argument to forge a new reality. In the end, they didn't just acquiesce to his vision, they adopted it as their own, having been pushed by the conflict to achieve something they once believed was impossible. This is the key. Jobs didn't argue out of ego. To prove he was the smartest person in the room, he argued with a clear, creative purpose to bring a revolutionary product into existence. If your words, your arguments, your conflicts do not move people towards a desired outcome, then they are, as we've established, just noise. But if they are a deliberate tool to build, to create, to innovate, then they are the work of a master. So how do we know the difference? How do we become the alchemist in the forge, and not just another brawler in a pointless tavern fight? We must develop a set of clear rules of engagement. The Übermensch doesn't argue blindly. He argues with precision and purpose. First, know your goal. Before you enter any conflict, ask yourself, what is the specific, tangible outcome I want to achieve? Is it to change someone's mind? To motivate a team? To expose a flaw in a plan? To defend a core principle? If you cannot clearly define your objective, do not engage. An argument without a goal is just emotional venting. Second, know your opponent. Is the person you are speaking with capable of changing their mind? Are they arguing in good faith, or are they merely defending their ego? Look for signs. Do they listen or just wait to talk? Do they ask questions or only make statements? Arguing with someone who is psychologically incapable of hearing you is like trying to plant a garden on solid concrete. It is a waste of seed and a waste of your energy. Your silence, in this case, is the more powerful tool. Third, argue to build, not to destroy. The goal of a constructive argument is not to humiliate your opponent or tear down their position. It is to build a better one. This is the Socratic model. You ask questions that help both of you explore the issue more deeply. You find common ground. You treat the problem as a shared enemy, rather than treating each other as the enemy. A destructive argument leaves both parties feeling wounded. A constructive conflict leaves both parties closer to the truth. Fourth, and most importantly, maintain emotional sovereignty. This is the bridge that connects everything we have discussed. Even when you choose to engage in conflict, you must never, ever surrender control of your own emotional state. The moment your voice rises in anger, the moment you feel the hot sting of defensiveness, the moment you allow their words to knock you off your center, you have lost your primary source of power. To be the master of the forge, you must be able to stand in the fire without being burned. This is the ultimate expression of the Übermensch, to calmly and deliberately wield the fire of conflict as a tool without becoming consumed by it. So, the path becomes clear. It is a path of conscious, deliberate choice. Now, at every moment, you must ask yourself, is this battle necessary? Or is it merely noise? Does it serve a creative purpose, or only a fragile ego? Is my opponent a partner in discovery, or a wall of dogma? And most critically, can I engage in this fire without becoming consumed by it? We are left, then, with what appears to be a paradox, a philosophy that champions both the unbreachable fortress of silence and the world-shaping force of the forge. But it is not a contradiction. It is a synthesis. It is the ultimate expression of power. True power is not a static choice between passivity and aggression. It is the fluid, dynamic mastery of the entire spectrum of human interaction. It is the wisdom of a grandmaster who knows that the power of a piece is not just in how it moves, but in the threat of its movement, in the space it controls, even while standing still. It is the wisdom of a master musician who understands that the music is made not just by the notes, by the silences between them. The journey Nietzsche sets for us is not about learning a single trick. It's about developing a profound sense of judgment. It is about becoming a strategist in your own life. Imagine that final, chilling scenario. You wake up one morning and you know, with absolute certainty, that you have only 100 words left to speak for the rest of your life. Every single word is now a precious, non-renewable resource. Every syllable carries immense weight. Would you spend them trying to win a petty argument with a stranger? Would you waste them on a defensive retort to a thoughtless insult? Would you burn through them in a fit of anger, trying to convince someone who has already decided not to listen? Or would you hoard them like treasure? Would you choose them with the care of a poet, the precision of a surgeon? Would you wait for the perfect moment, the one moment where a few words could change everything, to express a profound love, to impart a vital piece of wisdom, to create something beautiful, to shift the course of a life? That is the question. Vous, Astien. The answer reveals the difference between a life of reaction and a life of creation. Nietzsche's ultimate lesson is not about winning arguments. It is about becoming so profoundly the master of yourself, of your own inner world, that every action you take, whether it is a powerful silence or a carefully chosen word, becomes act of deliberate conscious will. It is about becoming the author of your life, instead of a character in someone else's play. The choice is not whether to speak or to be silent. The choice is whether to be an echo or a voice.